We believe that locking the doors, pulling the curtains, and turning off the lights are enough to keep us safe. That our homes are shields, walls that separate us from the dangers outside. But what happens when the real danger isn't outside at all? When the quiet you trust becomes the sound of something unseen moving closer. When the comfort of being alone fades, replaced by a creeping feeling that you're no longer the only one inside. Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories, moments when the ordinary turned to fear, and solitude was broken in ways no one should ever face. But before we get started, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey into darkness is just the beginning. These stories will only grow more unsettling, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because the night is just getting started, and the horror is about to unfold. Lena Harper lived alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets seemed to hold their breath once night fell. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other warmly during the day, and porch lights flickered softly in the darkness, casting long, stretching shadows. On this particular evening, the stillness was almost unnatural, as if the world outside had slipped into a deep silence, waiting. Inside her modest home, Lena settled into her favorite armchair by the living room window. The soft glow from a lone lamp filled the space with a warm amber light, painting the walls in muted hues. The rest of the house was silent, no hum of the television, no chatter from another room, just the quiet she often cherished after a long day. Tonight, she planned nothing more than to lose herself in a book she'd just started, a cup of tea steaming gently on the side table. As she opened the book and her eyes began to trace the words, the world outside started to slip away. The usual distractions faded, replaced by a growing calm that felt almost too deep. But beneath that calm was something else, a subtle shift in the air, a faint noise from beyond the glass. It was slight, a soft tap, maybe a branch brushing against the window, or the shuffle of footsteps on the pavement nearby. Lena paused and listened, her heart beating a little faster. She told herself it was nothing. This was a safe neighborhood, after all. Few people walked these streets after dark. But still, the feeling lingered, creeping in around the edges of her mind, a quiet tension settling in her chest. She tried to return to the pages of her book, but the silence outside pressed closer, and the small noise returned, faint, steady, and unsettling. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, hiding secrets she wasn't yet ready to face. As the night deepened, Lena tried once more to focus on her book, but the sense of unease refused to fade. The soft tapping outside grew more persistent, no longer just a faint noise, but a deliberate rhythm that seemed almost too steady to be random. She set her book down carefully and moved to the window, drawing back the curtain just enough to peer into the dimly lit street. The empty road stretched out in both directions, bathed in the cold glow of a street lamp, but there was no one there. Not a single figure, no passing cars, nothing but the quiet night and the shadows it cast. She exhaled slowly, telling herself to stop imagining things. Maybe it was a branch caught in the wind again, or a stray animal scurrying past. But even as she convinced herself, the feeling of being watched grew heavier. Lena's eyes darted to the front door, locked tight hours ago, and then to the back where the garden gate sat quietly, swaying just a little in the night breeze. The house was supposed to be safe. It had to be. Then her phone buzzed softly on the table beside her. Relief washed over her as she reached for it, but when she unlocked the screen, there was no message. Just a blank screen. A second later, the signal bars disappeared entirely, leaving her with no connection to the outside world. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't like her phone to lose signal inside the house. The thought pressed down on her chest. What if this was no coincidence? The tapping at the window stopped abruptly, replaced by a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails tracing the glass. Lena froze, breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, scanning the street again. Still no one there. No shadow, no movement. Yet the sound came again, sharp and cruel. She stepped back from the window, her mind racing, every instinct screaming to lock the doors again, to hide. But where could she hide from something unseen, something already inside the walls? Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she reached for the hallway light switch, only to find the bulbs flicker and die, plunging her into darkness. The quiet house suddenly felt immense and empty, every creak and groan amplified in the silence. Lena's eyes struggled to adjust as a new sound emerged: footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing just outside her front door. The soft scrape of shoes on the wooden porch, moving back and forth, closer and farther, but never away. She reached for the kitchen knife on the counter, fingers trembling as the footsteps continued. There was no way out, no call for help, just the night closing in tighter around her. And somewhere in the silence, a single note slipped under the door, a message she couldn't yet read, but knew would change everything. The footsteps outside her door grew heavier, each step slower than before, as if whoever was there was no longer just pacing but deciding. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she was frozen, caught between the desperate need to flee and the paralyzing weight of fear. The knife in her trembling hand felt impossibly small, useless against whatever waited beyond the door. Suddenly, the doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. The soft click of the lock disengaging sent a shiver straight down her spine. Lena's heart pounded so loudly, she was sure whoever was outside could hear it. She pressed herself against the far wall, trying to become as small and invisible as possible. The door creaked open a few inches, just enough to reveal darkness, a shadowy shape that refused to step fully into the light. There was no face, no clear form, just an outline moving ever so slightly, like something slipping between worlds. Lena held her breath, eyes fixed on the narrow gap. The intruder's hand reached inside, dragging a cold, slow finger along the edge of the door, tracing a path that felt like a warning. A whisper brushed past the threshold, too faint to understand, but heavy with intent. Lena's grip on the knife tightened until her knuckles went white. She backed away inch by inch, eyes locked on the door. Then the footsteps stopped. A silence deeper than any before fell over the room, pressing down like a heavy weight. Lena's mind raced. Was it over? Was the threat gone? She dared not move, afraid to break the fragile stillness. And then, from the crack beneath the door, a small piece of paper slid silently inside, fluttering to the floor at her feet. Lena's trembling fingers reached for it, unfolding the note with care. The words written there were simple but chilling, scrawled in hurried, uneven script. I was inside all along. The room seemed to close in around her. No forced entry, no broken locks, no signs of intrusion. But someone or something had been with her, hidden in the very walls of the house. The shadows in the corners suddenly felt alive, watching, waiting. And the phone, smashed and dead in the kitchen, was a silent witness to the impossible. Lena knew then that the nightmare was far from over. Lena stood frozen, the note still trembling in her hand. The words echoed in her mind. I was inside all along. How could that be? She scanned the room with wide eyes, searching for any sign of movement, any clue that might explain how someone had been so close, yet invisible. She moved cautiously through the house, checking every door, every window, every shadowed corner. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints, no unlocked doors, no forced entry. The locks were all intact, the windows shut tight. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, hiding a secret just beyond her sight. Her phone lay shattered in the kitchen sink, water pooling around it. The screen was cracked beyond repair, and there was no way to call for help. Panic welled up inside her, thick and cold. She realized the isolation was complete, the quiet neighborhood, the empty streets outside, the sudden loss of connection to the world beyond her walls. She thought back to the subtle noises from earlier, the footsteps pacing outside the door, the tapping on the window, the scraping at the glass. Had it all been part of the same presence? Something that didn't need to break in, because it was already inside. Then, a sound she hadn't noticed before, a faint whisper, almost a breath, coming from the hallway behind her. Lena whipped around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The shadows seemed to stretch and pull, shifting like living things. Her skin prickled, every hair standing on end. And then, from the corner of her eye, a flicker, something just beyond sight, a fleeting movement too quick to catch. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. She wasn't alone. The thought settled over her like a dark cloud. The real danger wasn't outside. It had never been outside. It was already inside. But as dawn crept gently through the windows, brushing the room with pale light, something shifted. The cold weight in the air began to lift, like mist burning off under the morning sun. Lena sat silently on the floor, the note still clutched in her hand, but her breathing slowed, her mind clearing. Whatever presence had haunted the night had receded, at least for now. The house, though still and quiet, no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in hours, she rose to her feet, walked to the front door, and opened it wide. The world outside was calm, the sky soft with the colors of a new day. Maybe the fear would return with the next sunset. But for this one morning, Lena let herself believe she was safe. In a remote stretch of countryside, far from the hum of city life, lived a man named Mara Collins. Middle-aged and accustomed to solitude, Mara's home was a modest farmhouse surrounded by dense woods, the kind of place where the silence itself felt heavy. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and on nights like this, when the wind howled through the trees, that distance felt even greater. This particular evening, a fierce storm had rolled in, blotting out the stars and drowning the world in sheets of rain. Thunder rattled the windows, and flashes of lightning briefly lit the darkened sky. Inside, Mara sat near the fireplace, but the storm had knocked out the power. The house fell into near-complete darkness, save for the occasional flicker of lightning and the faint glow of embers. The sudden quiet was unsettling. The usual creaks and groans of the old house felt amplified, every small noise sharp and intrusive. Mara reached for his flashlight, only to find the batteries dead. He sighed, knowing what he had to do. He rose slowly, muscles stiff from the day's work, and made his way toward the basement door. He needed candles, light to push back the shadows, and he hoped the old matches in the workshop still worked. Each step down the wooden stairs creaked beneath his weight, echoing in the cold, damp space below. The basement was a cluttered workshop filled with tools and half-finished projects, a place Mara spent hours during quieter days. Tonight, it felt different. The shadows stretched long and dark, the corners swallowing the weak light from the hallway above. The storm raged louder outside, rain hammering the roof like distant drums, the wind moaning through cracks in the walls. As Mara moved to the workbench, he noticed the sudden chill in the air, a coldness that didn't belong to the storm outside. The basement's stillness pressed in on him, and for a moment he hesitated, an unshakable feeling that he was not alone. Mara stood in the dim basement, the weak glow of his flashlight barely pushing back the thick shadows that clung to the corners. Outside, the storm's fury continued unabated, thunder rumbling low like a warning. He reached for a box of old candles on a dusty shelf, his fingers trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from a growing sense of unease that refused to loosen its grip. As he moved toward the stairs to head back upstairs, a faint sound caught his attention. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, pacing just beyond the basement window, where the storm-splattered glass blurred the view. He froze, heart pounding, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. But no figure appeared, no shadow slipped past the window's edge. Yet the steps continued, slow, steady, measured, like someone waiting, watching. Mara's breath hitched. He called out softly, but the storm swallowed his voice. The power, already unstable, flickered violently, light flashing and dying in rapid bursts, until the house was plunged once more into thick darkness. The only light now came from his failing flashlight, the beam shaking in his grasp. He reached for his phone to call for help, but the screen stayed black, no signal, no bars. Panic tightened around his chest as he tried again and again, desperation mounting with every failed attempt. The storm had cut him off completely, no calls, no messages, no connection. Then, a quiet shift, a small piece of paper slid silently beneath the basement door. Mara bent down, his hands numb as he picked it up. The note was hastily scrawled, the ink smeared in places as if written in a hurry. "You're not alone. I'm closer than you think." The words burned into his skin like ice. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing ragged, every muscle tense. The shadows around him seemed to flicker unnaturally, twisting and warping with the unstable light. Something moved just out of sight, too fast, too silent, vanishing before he could turn his head. The basement, once familiar and safe, had become a cage. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Mara's home, the real storm had only just begun. The basement door groaned under the weight of Mara's lean frame as he pushed against it, trying to hold back the darkness pressing in from every side. The note's words echoed in his mind. "You're not alone. I'm closer than you think." A chilling promise that sent ice crawling down his spine. His flashlight flickered, its beam wavering like a candle in the wind, barely penetrating the thick shadows that now seemed to pulse and breathe. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind him, slow, measured, deliberate, coming from the depths of the basement itself, not outside. The sound was unmistakable, heavy boots scraping against the concrete floor, circling, closing in. Mara's breath hitched, muscles tensing as fear blossomed into cold dread. He wanted to run, to climb the stairs and escape into the stormy night, but his legs felt rooted, paralyzed by the weight of the unseen. A sharp creak sounded above him, and then the faint scrape of metal, a tool dragged slowly across the floor. Mara's flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, a shape materialized in the corner of the room. A tall, indistinct figure, obscured by darkness but moving with a slow, unnatural grace. Mara's heart hammered, every instinct screaming for flight. He stumbled backwards, knocking over a workbench cluttered with tools. The clang echoed sharply, and in response, the figure paused, almost as if weighing its next move. Mara's hands shook violently as he reached out blindly, grabbing a wrench from the floor. It felt cold and heavy, a fragile lifeline in the suffocating dark. The footsteps stopped. The air thickened, every breath a labor, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, just when the silence threatened to crush him, a low, guttural whisper drifted from the shadows, impossible to understand but heavy with menace. Mara's eyes darted around, searching for the source, but the darkness swallowed everything whole. And then, without warning, the basement door slammed shut upstairs, a thunderous, final sound that sealed him inside with whatever was lurking. The nightmare had begun. Morning light struggled to pierce the thick curtains of Mara's farmhouse. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean but heavy with silence. Neighbors, alerted by the howling wind and Mara's absence, found him collapsed just beyond his front porch, bruised, disoriented, and barely conscious. They called for help, voices trembling as they recounted what little they knew. Back inside, the basement was eerily calm. The door Mara had slammed shut was now closed tight, no signs of forced entry or struggle anywhere in the house. But the air remained thick, unnatural, almost suffocating in its stillness. Tools lay scattered, but there was something different now. A series of objects arranged on the workbench in a pattern so precise it looked deliberate. Wrenches, hammers, and scraps of metal were placed side by side, forming a shape Mara couldn't understand, but that felt profoundly wrong. When the police arrived, they found no clear evidence of an intruder. No footprints in the muddy yard, no broken locks, nothing to suggest someone had slipped in or out. Mara's story seemed unbelievable, his fractured recollections of footsteps and whispers drowned beneath the storm's roar. Days later, as Mara recovered, he found a small, hidden camera taped beneath his workbench. The lens was cracked, but the memory card inside held footage that defied explanation. On the grainy video, shadows moved of their own accord, stretching and twisting in the dark corners of the basement. And there, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam, a figure lingered, motionless yet watching, its eyes glowing faintly with a light that was not human. Mara never understood what he encountered that night. Was it a person? Something else? Whatever it was, it had been waiting for him long before the storm arrived. And it still watched, because some nightmares don't end when the sun rises. They only begin to take hold. In the heart of a bustling city stood a modest apartment building, worn but sturdy, its walls holding countless stories, some bright, others shadowed with secrets. On the 7th floor lived Isolde Grant, a single mother who balanced the demands of work and parenthood with quiet determination. Her small apartment was a refuge from the chaos of the city outside, a place where she and her young child could find peace at the end of each long day. Tonight, the rain hammered relentlessly against the windows, drumming a steady rhythm that masked the usual noises of the city below. Thunder rolled softly in the distance, but inside the apartment, the air was still and heavy. Isolde's child lay asleep in the adjacent room, breathing softly beneath a thin blanket, oblivious to the storm beyond. Isolde sat quietly in the dim glow of the bedroom lamp, folding laundry with tired hands, when a sudden sound from the hallway froze her mid-motion. A faint creak, a whisper of movement, too subtle to be certain, yet enough to send a ripple of unease through her chest. She paused, listening intently. The usual noises of neighbors and traffic were muffled by the rain, leaving the faintest sounds exposed, fragile in the silence. Her heartbeat quickened as she rose, moving carefully to the door. She locked it with practiced precision, the click of the bolt a small comfort in the growing tension. Every nerve in her body prickled with alertness. She double-checked the windows, secure and shut tight against the storm's fury, and returned to the bedroom, where shadows pooled in the corners like dark water. The only sounds now were the steady beating of rain against glass, the soft hum of distant thunder, and the rhythmic rise and fall of her own breath. Isolde sat close to the door, clutching a small kitchen knife she kept nearby, not because she expected danger, but because she knew the world was no longer certain. Outside, the storm swallowed all other noise, isolating her within these walls. The city, once lively and alive, seemed to have slipped away into something colder, more distant. And inside, the quiet was deeper than ever, an empty space waiting to be broken. The rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows like the steady beat of a warning drum. Inside the apartment, Isolde sat motionless, the knife clutched tightly in her hands, her knuckles white. Her ears strained to catch any sound beyond the heavy drops and the muffled thunder rolling through the city. Then, from the dim hallway beyond her locked bedroom door, came the first subtle sound, a faint creak, like floorboards shifting under weight. Her breath hitched, every muscle taut with alertness. She whispered her child's name softly, relieved when the only reply was the quiet, even breathing from the next room. But the feeling of vulnerability gnawed at her, sharper than any blade. The footsteps began again, slow, cautious, moving just outside the door. Each step was deliberate, measured, echoing faintly in the narrow corridor. There was no shadow on the peephole, no hint of a figure. It was as if someone was stalking the edges of her world, just out of sight, but close enough to hear the quickening thump of her heart. Her phone was close by, but when she reached for it, the screen was dark, no signal, no bars. The storm had severed her lifeline, leaving her utterly alone in the growing darkness. Panic threatened to rise, but she forced herself to stay calm, slow her breathing, steady her shaking hands. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the hallway, soft at first, then more insistent, almost impatient. It wasn't a plea, it was a demand. Isolde pressed herself against the door, eyes wide, every instinct screaming to stay silent, to hide. Then came a faint whisper carried on the stale air, a sound so close it felt as if the voice was right beside her ear, but the door remained shut, the corridor empty. The rain's relentless drumming outside was no longer a comfort. It was a cloak for whatever waited just beyond the door, waiting for the moment to strike. The silence grew heavier, more suffocating. Isolde's world had shrunk to this room, to this breath, to the knife trembling in her grasp. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on Isolde like a physical weight. Her breath was shallow now, barely audible over the pounding of her heart, the knife clutched tightly in trembling hands. The rain outside continued its relentless assault against the windows, masking the sounds from the hallway, but offering no comfort. Then, from the darkness beyond the door, came a slow, deliberate jiggling of the doorknob, a sound that turned her blood cold. It twisted and turned, testing the lock, a methodical intrusion into the fragile safety she'd fought to build. Isolde pressed herself back against the wall, eyes fixed on the door, every nerve screaming in anticipation. The handle finally stopped moving. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then a soft scrape, a fingernail dragged slowly across the door's surface, a cruel, deliberate gesture meant to unsettle. The whisper returned, this time louder, clearer, though still impossible to understand, like a language spoken just beyond comprehension. Isolde's heart pounded harder, echoing in her ears as a shadow appeared at the window beside the door. She barely dared to look, but when she did, her breath caught in her throat. A face, masked and expressionless, stared in at her through the rain-streaked glass. Eyes locked onto hers with an unblinking intensity that felt inhuman. The figure's gaze held a promise of violence and silence, a cold and terrible patience. She stepped back, panic threatening to overwhelm her, but she couldn't break the gaze. The figure's lips moved silently, mouthing words she could not hear, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow vanished into the darkened hallway. Isolde sank to the floor, knife still in hand, trembling and alone, the storm outside raging but powerless against the terror inside. The locked bedroom door was her only barrier now, and she knew deep down it might not hold. Dawn's pale light seeped through the heavy curtains, casting long, uncertain shadows across the quiet apartment. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a fragile calm that felt both a relief and a warning. Isolde sat on the bedroom floor, knees drawn close, still clutching the small kitchen knife as though it were the only thing standing between her and the darkness. She hesitated, then slowly pushed open the bedroom door, stepping into the hallway that had been the stage for her terror the night before. The air was thick and still, heavy with a silence that seemed unnatural after hours of relentless noise. The apartment looked untouched, no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the thin carpet, no disturbance to her child's sleeping form in the next room. But the unease lingered, settling deeper into her bones. As Isolde moved toward the window where the masked figure had stared in, she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint set of smudges on the glass, too high for a child, too careful to be accidental. Her fingers traced the marks, cold and sticky, and her mind raced. The face she saw wasn't human. Not quite. That realization twisted inside her, sharpening her fear. She scanned the hallway again, then back to her sleeping child, heart pounding with a terrible question. Had the figure ever truly left? Had it been watching from inside the walls all along, waiting for the night to come? The locked door, the silent whispers, the impossible disappearance. They were pieces of a puzzle she wasn't meant to solve. Isolde's phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out, one new message, no contact name, just a single sentence. "Thank you for letting me in." The words chilled her deeper than the storm ever could. Isolde stood frozen, her breath shallow as the message lingered on the screen. But then, a soft sound drew her attention, a sleepy murmur from her child's room. She turned, the knife still in hand, and walked quietly to the doorway. There, curled beneath the covers, her child slept peacefully, untouched by the night's horrors. The morning light filtered in gently now, golden and calm, brushing the walls with warmth. Isolde exhaled slowly and set the knife on the table. Whatever had happened, whatever it meant, they were still here, together. And sometimes that was enough to begin again. Some dangers don't knock. They slip inside when you least expect it, and sometimes they never leave. As the shadows of these stories linger in your mind, remember, fear doesn't always roar. Sometimes it creeps in silently, in the spaces you least expect, in the moments when you think you are safest. The walls around us are meant to protect, but what if they hold secrets instead? Which of these home invasion stories chilled you the most? Was it story 1, story 2, or story 3 that chilled you the most? Share your thoughts and stories below. I want to hear if you've ever felt that creeping dread in your own home, or if something you can't explain ever crossed your path. If these true stories made you look over your shoulder, if they unsettled you enough to double-check your locks tonight, then hit that subscribe button. There are many more real-life horrors waiting to be uncovered, stories that will make you question the safety of your own walls and the quiet that lives within them. Turn on notifications so you never miss a tale that reminds us all. Sometimes, the most terrifying things happen when you're completely alone. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, the darkest stories are often the ones that really happened.